right, here we go. Today we got a guest. Our guest is Drew Sanis. Drew is a hitting coach in the Texas Rangers organization. Drew and I played college ball together, 5 years ago now?
We're getting old.
It's starting to happen.
Drew and I played college ball together almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about getting old.
We are getting old.
At the University of North Dakota, may she rest in peace. And then Drew transferred to Concordia St. Paul, where I was. I had also transferred there. And he finished up playing there when we were playing together. And then Drew worked at NIAC for a period of time, an undefined period of time, because I don't know how long.
I was there for 2019 until the spring of 2022. So 2.5 years, roughly. 3.5 years.
You were the hitting coach and then the head coach, correct?
I was the fourth coach at NIAC to start with. So I was doing infield stuff, and then I was helping out Sean on the hitting side. And just honestly, at that point in time, I was just learning from Sean more or less and kind of learning what was going on there. But yeah, I was the fourth coach there behind Travis and Brett and Sean, kind of at that given time, hanging out, living in the dorms and making $3,000.
Yeah, hanging out with
living the dream,
right?
Baseball.
Yeah. Now, so for the super fans of the pod, when we had Brett on, the Yankees pitching coach, for those of you who may or may not remember, they were on the same coaching staff there at NIAC, and that coaching staff was actually, like, as far as college baseball coaching staffs go, that was an all-star staff. Is it still true that all of you guys are in pro ball?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So Herg is still with the Phillies. Brett is obviously still with the Yankees, and Sean is still with the Twins, and I'm still with the Rangers. So we're all still in our first homes after those endeavors. Those three guys were way before me, obviously. And then after I was there for 4.5 months, they were like, "Hey, okay, we're leaving. Here's the head coaching keys. Go ahead." I'm looking around. I'm like, I'm 23 years old. Funny story, Alex. Actually, when that happened, I ran into your dad at ABCA.
Really?
And we were having a conversation. I was talking to him about it, and he was just like, "There's no better time than now. Go get him." And I was kind of like, "All right, that's how we're gonna go about this."
Oh, that's such a Paul response, because that's how he got into his first head coaching role. Same thing. He was like 24, maybe 25 when he got his first head coaching gig at an Oak Ramsey Community College, so another junior college, and he literally was just like, "Okay, I'm going to coach baseball and football," and he's like, "I'm just going to learn," because he learned from he was at South Dakota State, learned from a bunch of guys who were just same thing as you, like was in the right setting at the right time, and he was just like, "You're not going to know unless you know, so you may as well find out." And
exactly,
I mean, that's the best way to coach, which I would say is probably, I mean, looking back, you probably would agree with that. Like, you just got to start and see where it takes you.
Yeah, you're just ending up wherever it might. I mean, at that point in time, it was like trying to tread water. But looking back at it, it's like, yeah, you're just trying to be where everything is at that time and make sure you don't fuck it up too bad.
You're just drinking out of a fire hose endlessly. Like,
correct.
There's got to be no better setting for that than JUCO, right? I mean, you have a lot more freedom of operation, and you like have the ability to be like exercise some creativity with like the way that you practice, how much you practice, your schedules, and all that stuff. I feel like if you got your first head coaching job as a really young guy at like a Division III college, that'd be potentially even harder because there is a lot more like guardrails around how you can operate, and you can inadvertently break rules and piss people off and all that. But JUCO, you can just coach ball, I think, you know?
Correct. Yeah. I think the biggest thing I learned from like year one, which was, it ended up being the COVID shortened year, was kind of that first year more or less. So I didn't really get like a full year's experience. It felt like my first year was actually the following year. And then learning from that year going into the next year, it was like, okay, like we have these things in place, but like we're allowed to branch off of them more or less. And luckily, thankfully, at the time, I had some pretty creative people around me at the time. It was myself, Lincoln, Neil Kunick, and then it ended up being Danny Larson as well. And like all three of those guys are very like, hey, we should give this a shot. I think this is a good idea here and there. And it was like, yeah, let's go for it. We have the time, we have the resources. Why not? Kind of a thing. So
Yeah, you guys did have like probably more resources than your average junior college, maybe. Um, or maybe it wasn't so much that you had more resources, but maybe it's more so the ripple effect of that staff that was there before that was committed to actually developing the guys. And, people talk about JUCO like, oh, JUCO is good for development, but I feel like about 50% of JUCOs are actually really doing the thing. A lot of them are kind of just operating like normal college baseball teams in that guys show up and they put up or shut up, and the development is on you. You guys were doing a lot of like really specific stuff to try to help develop swings and arms and everything like that.
yeah, and I think it really goes back to like when Travis was at Nyack, go back even farther than that, when Pete was there, and Pete's at Kirkwood now, but he was with the Indians as a coordinator and those kind of things. But those two specifically, like I feel like they brought the creative piece into Nyack, and the rest of us got to just kind of branch off of that and be creative with all the things that they kind of put in place. And I think they answered like the major questions more or less what I think of that is like, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? Like who says that training is a bad idea? And that you don't need to have team practice 24/7, working on those team fundamentals that are like there. Now, they were still there and implemented, of course, but like, who says that the individual person that's there, especially at the junior college level, isn't coming, like, they're not coming there they are in a sense, like, they want to be around a winning culture and all those kind of things, but like, they're coming there to take their next step. And ultimately, at the end of the day, for those guys, it was like, how do we provide them with those things? And I think too, it was those bigger questions were answered prior to me being there of like, why can't we train like this? Why can't we hit like this? Why can't we throw weighted implements? All of those kind of things, like who's going to stop us kind of thing. And it just more or less turned into all of us getting to put our little creative niche on it as we went. And thankfully it all worked out for pretty much everybody in that group. So it was very cool.
You guys had a lot of dudes go to relatively big schools. If I remember right, you had some Power 5 guys come out of there. And I remember seeing your hitting when you would post from time to time, you'd post a hitter on your Instagram or on your Twitter. And, the bat speed development was next level. What would you attribute a lot of that bat speed development to, like looking at swing mechanics and blast motion and things like that? Or is it more on the strength and conditioning type side? Or was it kind of just like a combination of all the above or something else?
Personally, I think it was all the above, but I don't know if it's funny because like we talk about like the bat speed as the metric, right? But I don't know if we like chased bat speed more or less, like I see a lot of people going around like, hey, like we are chasing bat speed. Like when I look at that, I think it was like, yes, we know what makes really good hitters, and ultimately it's like they hit the ball really hard and they hit it at good angles. And all that we were trying to do was get our guys to like have intent with everything that they were doing. And I think the intent and the environment in both the hitting setting and the weight room were more so that drove like the bat speed piece of it. Like we were checking in and we were monitoring all that stuff for sure. But at the end of the day, it was like, how can we get them to hit the ball hard? Because in the game, ultimately, like that's all that matters. Like you can swing it as hard as you want, but if you don't like make contact, like it really doesn't matter at all. Like, yes, I would love to have player X that swings the bat 85 miles an hour over player Y that swings at 55, like no brainer there. And we can try to like figure out the in between. But more than anything, like we as a group, I don't feel like we ever were just like, hey guys, like today we're chasing the bat speed metric, like it was the environment that was already there. It was like, you were going to swing hard. You were going to try to drive the baseball. You were going to get your best swing off, and we are going to try to hit homers. And just like that piece came along with it before there was even like "Oh, are you tracking it?" It was like, "No, we're just trying to launch baseballs."
I love that. Do you remember?
Yeah, man, I
I,
think that's great.
when I remember back when I think it was like 2010, 12, when it was like everybody was infatuated with like swinging a bat at like a pocket radar or whatever, and they'd be like, "Oh, I just clocked a one," like my bat speed's like climbing up, like you said, Drew. Like they're literally chasing bat speed, and you're watching these guys go out and hit like a buck 10, but it's
Mhm.
because they're chasing back speed, like you said, in a vacuum. There's not.
Right.
There's no outcome. That's so great because that's like Zach and I talk about this all the time. That environment of is what drives adaptation. Like
Right.
putting guys in an environment where you have a mindset and intent to do something specific with either that session or that month that you're training. That is the most important thing. So that's so sick. I love
Yeah.
that.
I actually just had a conversation with a kid about this. Because he was like, I love blast motion. I use it all the time with all of the guys that I kind of get to be around in the off season. And then I use it during the season and all those kind of things. But I just had a conversation with a kid who, like, he took like 3, 4, 5 swings, and like his question, I hadn't been around him a lot at this point in time, but his question is like, "Hey, like my bat speed's kind of slow today," and I'm like, dude, we're talking about 2 to 3 to 4 swings here right now. Like, can we gain like 100 and gain like 150 of those swings and then have this conversation? Like, it's not one singular event like over and over and over and over again. Like, you have to sit there and say like, okay, you did it once, but now you have to do it again, and then you have to do it again, and then you have to do it again. Like, they're never going to stop asking you to do it over again. So it's like, can you repeat it, not just like show it, you know? And I think a lot of that right now, especially, like, there's a ton of bat speed stuff out there, and it's like super important. But I think what gets lost in context is that there's a lot of places that are doing it the right way. And by the right way, I mean like they're including a swing decision component of it. They're including like understanding what a bat path may or may not look like. They're including like the baseball piece of it. But I think what we lose is like, especially, I mean, I'm around hitting Twitter. I don't contribute actively, but I look on there and people are just like, so and so posted about how hard they're swinging. They're automatically wrong. And it's like, no, like everyone has a bat speed. It's always there. But
Mm-hmm.
like, are they getting the most out of the training that's taking place? You know? So, which encompasses
It's,
being a hitter, like
yeah.
as a whole.
It's such a good point, man. I mean, I also don't contribute to hitting Twitter very much because I don't really consider myself a hitting coach that much anymore. I'm hitting coach adjacent. I coach hitting from time to time, but it's not my anyway. Somebody posted the like offensive numbers from Major League Baseball, 2024, and somebody was like, the tweet was like, can somebody explain why Major League Baseball players are getting worse? Like offense is worse, like hitters are bad. And Jonathan Lucroy, who, if you follow baseball, you probably should know who that is. Like he's not a Hall of Famer, but he's probably the Hall of Very Good. Like really, really great Major League Baseball career.
Hall of generational for a certain time period.
Yeah, Hall of like really, really good 7-year career or whatever it was. But
yeah,
he posted a tweet that was like a 600-word essay explaining how basically the gist of it was he blames hitters chasing launch angle and exit velocity and not hitting the ball hard to the outfield. And I'm like, you just said launch angle and exit velocity in different words. Like, how is it that we're still arguing about this? It's so weird to me how you get these sort of like quote like old head hitters who are like, oh, these kids, they're just chasing their launch angles. When I was growing up, we would just try to match the plane of the ball and hit it to the outfield. I'm like, you just described an angle. Just because you didn't say a number does not make that an angle. You just said smash factor, launch angle, and exit velocity. Hit the ball hard to the outfield more often, right? Like you need to give guys more credit. What they're trying to do is exactly what you're saying. They're just trying to figure out how to get there sooner, more efficiently, more often, right? And you and I were talking about blast motion once, and I thought you said something really insightful. I was talking about I was asking you about how it goes with pro hitters, like, do they ever fight you on it? Like, do they not want to see it? Do they want to see it when you don't want to do it? Like, well, how's the relationship with like putting a blast on their swing and like measuring all the biomechanics and all that stuff? Like, and he's like, oh yeah, some guys, they don't want that shit. Like, they're like, oh, that's going to get me cut. You know, you don't need to be looking at my swing. I'll just put up numbers and don't worry about it. Like, and you said, dude, it's not for you. It's for us. And that's like, so like, it's such a silly, like stupid, like maybe borderline obvious thing, but it's insightful because people assume the hitters are like staring at their iPad, looking at their swing. It's for the coaches. It's to see if the coaches are like auditing themselves. They're going, am I full of shit? You know, is my training actually working, or is the guy's swing objectively improving? Because having a good swing is just about having the ability to do it more often. Like you said, like it's consistency, margin for error, you know, and like, as it turns out, hitting's hard. Like,
yes, very hard, especially with the way pitching's going right now. Pitching is hard to hit at this point in time. And I think like it's getting to the point where it's getting absurd. There's been some times, even in the last like 3 years that I've been in professional baseball, you're like, wow, like these guys are really, really, really good. And I feel like I've learned more about pitching in the last like 3 years than I had known my entire life, more or less, just being around and seeing like the talent that there is in arms right now. But back to your original point, it's like I think all of the technology and all of those pieces that are in there, like if they're being used properly, which not everyone is using them properly. So there probably is some argument within all of those pieces for the other side as well. But ultimately at the end of that, like from my lens anyway, you're looking at all of that stuff to make environmental decisions and how you want to go about like influencing one, conversation, but two, the training environment. And I think if you can direct and guide conversation quicker, who's going to say no to that? Like, I don't know anyone, one, if it's like more efficient and it's quicker and it's a more direct, and by direct, I mean like not, hey, me going straight to the player saying this is what's going on, but if it's more of a like through their lens or through their idea and you can somehow slip that in, who's going to say no to that? The player's going to be like, oh, okay, sounds good. And then you're walking away from that conversation both as a win-win, you know? Or there's even times where you might have something and you're not even going to said player. You're going to said player's best friend over here who's going to get through to them way easier than I might at that given time because of performance or whatever it might be. And now you can have that conversation with him and he's maybe the direct line of communication to get that through to them. Not saying that there isn't conversation there, but like you can use those other pieces around you as well to like play the puzzle out and manipulate those things to ultimately help guys in different ways. You know, I think we're silly to think that we're going to like ultimately have the magic wand for everybody. That's not going to necessarily work.
Another piece to that too is I remember seeing years ago when Chris Bryant was first coming into the league. I remember seeing something on TV about like his natural like swing shape and how it makes him a really great low ball hitter. He attacks the ball down in the zone really well. And I that stuck in my mind because it's like, okay, another big reason to measure these things is to help inform plate approach, you know, and knowing like, okay, I'm not going to hit the ball up in the zone very well, so I need to like make that adjustment because some guys, you make this assumption that a high level hitter is going to instinctively know this, but they don't always. You know, the ball up in the zone looks good; it's closer to your eyes. The ball down in the zone, you're taught is the pitcher's pitch. You know, growing up, and so if you have certain characteristics about the way you naturally move that say, hey, actually, you're going to hit the ball down in the zone really well. You know, or you know, hey man, you get your arms extended really well. You can back off the plate and be fine. You know, like these small, just like, hey, why don't you like look down, see what happens? And that stuff is, I think, underrated. Severely underrated.
Severely underrated is right. When you look at it from that lens too, I think there was, I want to say like 2021, and somebody will have to fact check me on this, but there was a Dave Roberts quote. I think it was a playoff game. He had pinch hit someone, and it wasn't somebody else. And they were basically like, hey, why didn't you pinch hit stud player X? I don't remember the exact situation. And he basically came out and was like, oh yeah, like the pitch shape was a better matchup for the hitter that we went with in that situation. And what he was ultimately referring to is what you're talking about of like, there's guys like your bat path is going to basically like dictate where in the zone you're going to have not all the success, but more success or more frequent success. Now, in a perfect world, we'd be able to ultimately like cover both. But there is some guys that are just so like it's a superpower for them. I mean, you look at like a Mike Trout, for example, right? Like bottom 2/3 of the zone, absolutely crushes, and then he like doesn't do damage in the top half necessarily, at least as frequently as the bottom part of the zone. And you're like, does that make him a bad player? No, it makes him really good at knowing who he is. And I think like the circling, like more or less the circling approach with all of this is they have to understand who they are. And if they don't understand who they are, like you'd be amazed. I mean, even for you guys, I'm sure, even in the high school setting, like how many of those guys understand like who they are, and not even who they are right now, but who they could be as well. And getting back to like, hey, like it's okay. You're 165 pounds. Okay, you play second base. It's okay that you bat to ball, hitting line drives all over the place, on base a ton. Do your thing, bud. Like,
Yeah.
go for it. If you're sitting here trying to launch homers 165 pounds, like, yeah, I want you to get your doubles. I want you to hit the ball hard. No one is like equating that, but like, how are you going to help your team at the end of the day, right? And who are you, and what is your style, and how do you fit into the group that's like with around you 24/7? Or how are you going to help your high school team? How are you going to help your college team? I mean, at the pro level, it's a little bit more individualized, but there's situational stuff that comes up as well. You know, how are you going to have an approach given that setting and know who you are at that time? Like, it's 2-0, you have a runner on third base, the infield's back, you're down by 2 runs, it's the 6th inning. Like, you don't have you've got 1 homer on the year. Hit a 1-hopper to the second baseman. Like, please.
Yeah.
If it gets through up the middle, great, awesome, fantastic. You know,
You
just got yourself an RBI, and on top of it too, I think we underlook the confidence piece of that. You know, like if I'm walking back after getting an RBI, like we get this gratitude from everyone that's coming from us, or that like that happened. You're dapping people up, and it's like, hey, I drove in a run, all that kind of stuff. Like that could lead into your next step at where maybe you do smoke a double and nobody's on base, or you do get the big hits, or whatever it might be. So
there was something you said earlier, Drew, that is like it's such a good like coaching tip or like coaching inside thing that unless you've been around a lot of guys for a long time, you don't pick it up. You're like, you said, I'll go talk to his buddy, which that might be my way in. Like knowing that's so good of you to know that, because like it's so hard to get over that the ego part of it initially, like when you first start that, like I'm the solution for this person. Whereas really you have to step back. It's like a lot of times we aren't the solution. We are just, like Zach said a couple weeks ago, we're directing traffic. And sometimes if you got to use the other buddy or you got to use the herding dog to like move them along versus you on the back of the horse actually like moving them along, they're going to get to the same place either way. And that's like, this comes back to what you just said there, like knowing yourself as a player. I think if you have a coach that knows themselves and what they can and can't do, that makes it so much easier. That environment dictates and leads to such a better like learning. It's just so much better. But it's also quick anecdote from like a pitcher guy to hitter guys. Like we don't really get that as much with pitcher guys. Like pitcher guys just want to be better, and there's not as much of like the mind game thing. Whereas hitting is very mind gamey. Like as a guy who's never been innately amazing at hitting, like I go through so many more mind games hitting than I do pitching. Pitching, I just go up there and throw. And I get at the plate, I'm like, okay, I got to feel this and I got to do this. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's just moving. and you just have to have confidence in what you're doing. But that was a good point though, Drew. Using other players or the environment to get the result that you want from the guy without directly doing it yourself is huge.
Yeah.
To be able to step away.
Think back to our own college experiences, right? Like, we had people that we gravitated towards at those settings that we were in that we more or less confined in, even more so than our coaches. Not because we did not value the opinion of our coaches. That has nothing to do with it at all. It was more like, hey, man, I'm going through it right now. I can't figure out what's going on. Like, I feel like I'm on an island, and you and your buddies are more or less like sitting around the dorm room coffee table trying to chop it up and figure out, like, you're going through swing mechanics and all those other kind of things. And there might be something that clicks in there at the time. You think there is, but I think we forget that they have those conversations regardless. They're having them at school. They're having them when they go back to their apartments. They're having them, when they're in their dorm rooms. I mean, to think that we're not having those conversations is silly. So if we have the opportunity to ultimately impact them, like, okay, we can lead them in the right direction.
I dig that.
Absolutely. And building that trust to like have them value what you say is not instantaneous. It takes time. So like when you're in professional baseball, so you transition from college ball to professional baseball. In professional baseball, how many times have you had a repeat player from year to year? Have you? Because in college, in JUCO, you'll have guys for 2 years in theory every time. In pro ball, or is it a revolving door, or do you get a chance to spend like a little bit longer with some of these minor leaguers?
I've been fortunate because I went from low A to high A, like in the transition, so I got to spend time. My first year group was different than my second year group, but my first year group was similar to my third year group, if that makes sense.
Oh, sure.
So I've spent time, I kind of had like a gap year in between there, but I've spent time with a group of guys basically I've had 2 of the last 3 years. I've spent like a good chunk of time with quite a few of them. But again, to your point, it's probably by quite a few. I mean, like 4, 5, maybe, you know. I wouldn't so much say it's like a revolving door, but back to the original conversation that we were talking about getting through to guys, like, I think that's why, though, I've noticed that so quickly is because, like, guys will come up from low A or from other places, and you don't know who they are, and you're confining in the other hitting coach. Hey, what did you do with him? How did you have that conversation? How are those things on a day-to-day with him? What were some things that worked for him? What conversations didn't work for him? And you're trying to figure those things out fast and on the run, but you're not just going to bring that directly to him. So it's like, okay, he's really good friends with him and sees that guy as like a mentor, like, perfect, boom. That's how we're going to kind of like attack that. But to your point, there's maybe 4 or 5 guys that I've spent like the last 3 years with in like a large chunk compared to the majority. So
what would you say is like the biggest difference between coaching in that setting and coaching in the college or even high school setting? Because you've done a little high school coaching here and there. Like you coached, I remember you coached a club fall team with me once. That was fun.
Yeah, we did. Indeed.
Guarantee that was such a good team. You guys are such good coaches.
There was actually a couple kids on that team who went on and played college baseball.
We had, there was 2 or 3 that played college ball. But
I'm trying to think.
It's 3 a.m.
Sorry, what was your question
McDonald's
again? Like what's like coaching in that setting? Like what's the main differences between coaching in college and your day-to-day schedule, approach, how it works, who you're working with, what kind of different, like for example, one of the things that when we talked to Brett DeGagne, one of the things that he mentioned was, guys at that level are usually highly educated. Like they speak the language of the professional organization. They're looking at their TrackMan. They're looking at their pitch shapes. That's the language they speak. By the time they reach professional baseball, they're pretty educated on that. So they don't have to go through a whole lot of learning curve. And he said that's kind of one of the big differences for him is like he didn't have to like teach guys about that. If anything, every now and then they're telling him, yeah, usually I'm looking for this on my two-seamer, and I'm not seeing it right now, and then that's kind of where this conversation has a jumping off point. And so that's like an obvious one that comes to mind.
I think the biggest thing for me is the difference between, and I think we forget about this even a little bit because we just think like, oh, it's just baseball, right? It is what it is. But like, I went from coaching 54 games to 132 games. Like every problem that is in front of me at the junior college level was like, hey, we need to solve this in the next week. We need to figure this out. There's other problems within like the professional baseball setting that you are like, hey, this is not something that we need to bring to him at like right now, kind of a thing. Like you're afforded the time to be a little bit more patient. That doesn't mean you don't address it in different ways with, ultimately changing the environment, changing the stimulus, trying to like create some things off of it for them. But you have some time there to ultimately like, hey, like let's sit back and see if he figures this out a little bit from what we have already given him, more or less. And I think that's like the biggest adjustment for me, where at the junior college level, there was guys that were like running to the door. What's wrong? Something's wrong. Something has to be wrong. And you had to deflect that back to like, hey, no, man, like you just had a tough week back there. It was just not your week. You swung at terrible pitches and you got yourself out. You were having those conversations, and those conversations still happen at the pro ball level. But I think you give yourself, or you try to give yourself a little bit longer of a runway with that to ultimately say like, hey, yes, we're addressing it. Yes, we're trying to go about it, but we got 132 games. If I wear this guy out with 10 things in the first 2.5 weeks, like by the time we get to week 4, he's going to look at me and be like, I don't believe a single thing you're saying. Mm-hmm. And that's like the biggest thing I think that I learned was you have to kind of slow play a lot of things. And ultimately it's a slow drip, especially like in high A, right? Like we are close to the big leagues, but we're also not close to the big leagues, depending on how you're looking at it. And there's still a lot of developmental time that's going to take place in there. So you're like, what is the most important thing right now? Like not the magic bullet, not the, hey, this is going to make him a big leaguer tomorrow kind of a thing. Like, no, what's the most important thing for him at this given time? And what can we maybe not wait on, but like, hey, let's let this build and play out and see if it's actually something we need to address over a longer period of time. And I'm sure that window gets even tighter as you go up. I can't imagine. I haven't been at the AA or AAA level. Brett could probably speak to that a little bit more. But I'm sure that window gets even tighter where guys are like, what's going on? 2 games, not seeing breaking balls well, whatever it might be. I'm sure they're just a little bit quicker to react to those things because they feel like it's like the next door is going to open for them. But ultimately at the lower levels, I think it's like building the foundation and letting them kind of figure out, and us figure out, who they are at the end of the day. And can we figure out like, okay, what are the things that we need to push with them? What are the things we don't need to push with them? So I think that's every org though, not just ours specifically.
So we've said a couple of different times, we've talked about environment design. Can you walk us through an example of something that you've done that is designing an environment to elicit some kind of specific outcome with a hitter or try to nudge him in a certain direction?
I think the easiest one, and I literally just did this yesterday when I was down working at the shed. The easiest one is manipulating the machine relative to angles and giving guys training bats or training and just telling them like, hey, I want you to hit this here. And they look at you and they're like, well, what about my swing? And you're like, yeah, we're fixing that under the radar right now, bud. Like you don't realize that you're doing this, but you are actually like, we're emphasizing whatever it might be, The biggest one right now for a lot of the younger guys, and I would be curious to know if you guys see this a lot, but I'm surprised at, it seems like hitting is taking a 180. At one point in time, it was hit down on everything, like low shoot ground ball through. Your mentality was like really low flight throughout the entire field. And now it feels like we're on the other side of the spectrum with these younger kids, and maybe it's like the groups that I'm working with, and maybe it's individual specific, but it seems like every single guy is like, I need to hit the ball as high as I possibly can 24/7. And you're like, no, 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 no. Like, we're going to draw you back in here, you know? It's like we've lost the middle ground in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys see that from your lens a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, they have access
we
to
do,
a lot of information now, but
we do and we don't. I would say we don't see it. We definitely see it. I know exactly. Like I can think of some individuals, right off the top of my head that
we got guys.
You know, I put a blast motion on this one particular kid last summer. He's a college kid, and he's having a really hard time making contact with fastballs, especially up in the zone.
Mhm.
And I'm like, hey man, your swing path, like your attack angle is plus 17. Like you are swinging at a 17, 18, 19 degree angle upward. He's like, I'm trying to hit in the air. I'm like, yeah, but the ball is traveling at like 9.
Mhm.
Like you're not matching plane. You're doing this is the same as chopping at it, but the inverse. You have
Correct.
no margin for error. The only way you're going to hit it is clip it on the way by, and if you square it up, you still are not going to hit it hard enough to. It's just a fly out.
Mhm.
Like best case scenario is a high towering fly out to center field. You have nothing here, you know. And so I made him hit with a blast, and like this is one of the few times I've ever had a guy like look at the thing every swing. I'm like, if it's 2 digits, it's wrong. Like I want you to see 1 digit every time on your attack angle. Just look at that one thing, 1 digit. And so we were able to kind of get him to flatten out. And to him, it felt like your perception is not always reality with this stuff.
Right.
It's chopping.
Right.
It's like I'm chopping at it. I'm like, you're plus 9. You're on plane now, right? But we do still see like what I see is, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but there's a lot of like overactive top hands with hitters in high school, and that creates some down stuff because they'll push their barrel off their shoulder way early, and then their swing path is like down, across, out, and in, and they're not in the zone very long. And so we've been doing a lot of like relaxing the top hand a lot and learning how to like barrel turn behind the back shoulder, so that they can get on plane and rotate to hit the ball. But to your point, we are doing the exact same thing you just described. We're doing a lot of manipulating angles. Luke Roscom does an amazing job with this. He's always got something where he's giving them some kind of environmental challenge. He's got the machine pushed over to the side of the cage, one side or another, right-handed, left-handed. A little detail that I really like is if he's got it as a lefty angle, he's making the guys feed it with their left hand specifically, just to add a little bit of that visual information. We're looking at like, trying to get that 20-degree launch angle, hit it off the back net, above the head of the feeder, off the ceiling, just below the ceiling kind of thing. Depends on how high your cage is. Max strength, we got tall cages. We got nice cages. So.
We got tall cages. The best.
Yeah. But I mean, the environment design is such an easy hack, and I'm glad you said that because that's one of my favorites, the angle stuff, and hit it to a certain area. Off of that angle, odds are you're moving in the way that we want you to move. And if you're finding a way to do that without moving the way I want you to move, maybe I'm wrong anyway.
Job.
Like I don't know, we'll see. You are a good hitter. Congratulations, bless you.
Right.
So it's.
But ultimately,
that's a really good one.
Here's another question now. Like, if they're accomplishing the task, like, how much do our eyes tell us? Like, we can say yes or no that how this is moving, but if he's accomplishing the task 9 times out of 10, like, you're a good hitter. Like, I might not visually love how that looks, but does that matter?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the game's the game, right?
Right. Yeah, well, especially for when it comes to hitting, it's purely moving and interacting with. It's all like you're taking in so much information as a hitter, and you have to interact with all of it all at once. So, however you best can manipulate your body to like meet that task. It's the same thing with pitchers. Like, not every pitcher moves the same way. Not every runner runs the same way. Not every jumper jumps the same way. But if you're putting out elite numbers, or you're doing the task as best as possible for the frame that you have, why would we change it?
Right.
Like, what if it works? Like, I mean, perfect example is you look at Julio Franco, way back. That is the weirdest looking, like, but elite hitter. Like, you can't say that it didn't work.
Was so good.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. There's so many
here's another question for
scenarios.
you. To that point, like, so you're taking in all this information, right? And we say stuff. You said it a little bit ago, like, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing breaking balls, this and that. It's something that every hitter says, like, I'm seeing it really good today.
Mm.
There's what I think is like a new frontier in hitting training, and it's still pretty young, is sort of like the vision training type stuff. You see every now and then you'll see something pop up from like a drive line where they've got guys with those glasses on that track their eyes and where they're looking.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting area of sports science, and I'm excited to see what kind of comes out of that in terms of useful, like, practical stuff. Have you guys, and I know sometimes pro organizations are careful about what you're allowed to say, so don't get yourself fired, but have you guys implemented anything in terms of trying to work on helping these guys see the game better?
So let me rewind there. Like, I'll stay out of the pro realm more or less, but like I think that even something back to that we talked about at NIAC specifically was like, where are you guys looking? And they're like, well, what do you mean, where am I looking? You know, like, they don't, like, that question alone struck so many guys and like took a lot of guys back, right? And there's a lot excuse me, there's a lot of information out there right now with like the gaze training and those different things, and personally, like, I haven't dug super deep into it. The gist of what I've got and what I've used from it at this point in time, though, is like middle of the body, no differently than we think about when we're moving in the weight room or we're moving from a swing. Like, the middle of the body is going to ultimately like dictate some other information elsewhere at a different point in time. So what at NIAC specifically, my last year I was there, like, I had a couple guys where it was like, hey man, like, I want you to focus here in the middle before you try to find this blind release point up here in the right top corner. And what I mean by that is, like, there is all this information that for timing, for other pieces, that you are ultimately missing out on. Again, this is like personal, but like, there's so many things that are telling you to be on time here, and you're ultimately missing that, all of that information, by just staring at this blank window off in space over here and trying to be on time with a arm that is swinging in a pendulum. Like, I think back to the old Iron Mike, right? It was like wham kind of a thing, but you saw it coming the entire time, and that was like your time to load, more or less. But I think back to that as like the guys that are even when I was at NIAC a little bit, it was like, hey, put your focus in the middle here, not like hard, but like a softer focus in the middle there, so that you can understand, like, you're doing this dance with him, rather than it being just like, the window's here, stare, and keep staring, and keep staring, and keep staring. Like, that's something personally I never really understood. I don't have a ton of like data to back it up, but I do think, to your point, Zach, like, it is in the infancy right now. But I think that you go back to like the training piece of it, right? And even at NIAC, like, very simple piece of all that is like, you can change the size of the ball. You can change you can use two machines. Like, those are all still like vision training implements. You can use the projector on the wall and do the like pitch inclusion stuff where they cut off kind of like halfway through, more or less. But yeah, I think it's like definitely in the infancy still as well, because that's probably like the people that have the information on that and are solely using it are probably doing pretty good at this point in time, I would assume. They're probably ahead of the game.
Well, it's so interesting. Like, hitting is such a different animal than pitching, like you said, Alex. Like, there is so much more information that the mover is interacting with, one, and two, that the coach has to pay attention to in order to help a guy do well. Pitching, there's this repeatability that's sort of assumed, which may or may not be correct. That's a whole other thing. But like, I know some folks that are trying to get some more biomechanics stuff and into the market, and they want to work with hitters on this, right? They want to do both pitching and hitting biomechanics. And I struggle with it a little bit because you look at a hitter's biomechanical measurements, like how his physical body is moving, and you ignore the bat, you ignore the pitch, you ignore what he's seeing, what he's looking at, where his eyes are pointed. It's looking at such an incomplete picture. And then you're only looking at one swing, by the way. If that's what you're doing too, like it doesn't tell you much, really. Like I really want somebody out there to get more accessible information that's going to somehow combine these pieces of information about what is the hitter seeing, how is he somehow measure how he's perceiving that, which feels like an impossible task, but I don't know. And then
Neuralink.
Yeah, well, yeah, seriously. I mean,
that's what it's going to take, because there's no other way.
How else do you literally measure brain waves and start to quantify how guys are interacting with this stuff? But beyond that, it is so subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Hitting, it is such a difficult thing to learn. And like hard focus, soft focus, you can do all the gaze tracking you want, but I don't know, can you tell whether he's hard focusing or soft focusing, or can you only tell where his eyes are actually pointing? I don't even know.
I don't know.
But
it's a good question.
I can't tell the difference.
I can point my eyes at you and look past you. Like I can. So there's so many pieces that are just unknowns and really fascinating. And if you think a little too hard about it, you're gonna get yourself in a pretzel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
back to the the biomechanics side of it, right? Like, we want that information for sure, because we all want to understand like how they're moving, and can we maybe assist in those other pieces, right? With the can we not artificially, but can we create those things that you're talking about with vision and stabilizing vision and all those kind of things within like the break that's happening maybe biomechanically, and help influence those things a little bit. But back to your original point, like I honestly think that Driveline's maybe the only place that has done like the contacts in the eyes and like tried to like watch where people are going. Maybe I'm sure maybe there actually probably is some other places that have as well, or maybe there's some other environments that have utilized that kind of stuff outside of baseball.
Yeah.
But I'm not privy to it. So if anyone finds information on that, please send it over.
They do it a lot.
Driveline's the only place that I know of that has such the perfect marriage between baseball people and like computer science people, like guys who are really, really legit high level technology guys and baseball guys. Like that marriage is like super unique,
They use the ocular training a lot, Drew, and that's like vertigo stuff, like neurological reeducation post injury, that kind of stuff. But once again, that's not like high level like performance. It's more like, hey, dude, let's just make sure you can walk.
Right.
Like the divide is huge. It's crazy. Yeah.
What does that like protocol look like though? From that,
dude, everyone's different. So this is like Zach and I have talked about this quite a few times. So like I just started to kind of dip my toes in that. Not that I treat a lot of like vertigo cases and things like that, but a lot of times it's honestly whatever the person can tolerate, depending upon like, once again, you want to talk about subjectivity. Your neurological load or your neurological capacity when it comes to like processing information is purely subjective. Like each individual can only have so much. So you could create whatever protocol you want, but it's going to change. It's just like hitting, and it's just like coaching. It's like you can be like, this is how we do things. And then you're going to get one guy that doesn't fit it. And you're like, oh, never mind. We don't do it that way anymore. So it's the like neurologically, everybody picks up information differently. So like they'll put people in, whether it be like they'll use the like those neural processor, like the analytics where it's like which part of your brain is lighting up, and then they correlate that to which part of your like where you're looking within gaze and how much information you're taking in. But then again, you can only move so fast, right? So if you're just post stroke, you can probably only handle 10 minutes of that taking 15 steps. Whereas if you're like a higher level, more functioning person, and you're trying to like not be dizzy anymore when you look over your right shoulder, you probably can handle quite a bit more. So the protocol varies. That's a terrible non-answer, this was one other point I want to make. Like when we talk about pitching, like when we had Brett on, like pitching is very like, this is what we did. Here's how we got there. This is the result we got with that guy. Like, I feel like we've been talking about hitting for an hour and we have no, like, there's no end.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else sense that? Like it's this
part of
like
what's
it's
exciting and fun
an
about it,
inevitability.
though, you know?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know. It's amazing. Yeah.
There's ultimately like there's so many different ways to do it that it's like I think there's the funnel or the funnel is narrowing as to like what works, what doesn't work, kind of a thing. But there's still outliers everywhere,
Oh yeah.
you know, and I think that there always is going to be some sense of an outlier because the game is the game, and there's certain things that are going to be expected of it at certain periods of time.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you want to score runs, you can't be a one-trick pony as an offense. Otherwise, you're going to have 9 guys, and you're going to get lucky one day, and the next day you're going to show up, and it's not going to be what you want it to be. So
we've definitely seen some orgs do that. That's for sure. If you follow Major League Baseball, you can probably think of 2-3 teams that have
kind of the White Sox
accidentally or on purpose had that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's all good. That's all super interesting. One last question I have for you, and then we can wrap. You've got what, dozens of hitting coaches in the Rangers organization where you work.
I think we have 8 or 9. Maybe it's more than that.
So from the major league level through the minor leagues, you've got this whole staff of hitting coaches. Now, one thing that I've found is true about baseball people, we all have this tendency to be very opinionated. And even like at Max Strength, we are on the same page, right? We're a team effort where our philosophy is something that is it's an agreed upon model of reality. Like, but even with that said, every day we're debating some detail, right? There's always this internal kind of like debate. We're trying to run a meritocracy. Everybody, like, you're not married. You're trying not to be married to your own ideas, but everybody really believes they're right for good reasons, right? It's not not for no reason. And there's every now and then there's friction, which is healthy, right? But I'm curious, like the more cooks that you get in the kitchen, the higher the stakes. Like, what has that experience been like for you? And do you see, is it a hierarchical? Is it a hierarchy for you? Like, is it something where like you got your boss and your boss's boss and saying, this is what we're going to do as an org and you got to fall in line? Or is it more of a collaborative kind of team? What do you think? Like, how does professional baseball work from that angle?
I think I've been fortunate to be in an environment and underneath the umbrella of people that are very collaborative. And I think we all kind of grasp the concept that we don't have all of the answers and nobody is going to be like perfectly right 24/7, which I think is definitely what helps within all of those conversations. And ultimately at the end of the day, like, you just want the players to be good. Like, that's all that matters. So if the direction that we go and that we want to go is this way and it gets them to be a big leaguer, like, great, awesome. Like, that's all we needed. And I think from that lens, I think that's really how you have to approach it, at least in the professional setting as well, is like, we all have our ideas and we all want to be like right, I guess is the easiest way to put it, or feel like our opinion is valued and all those other kind of things. But if it gets player X to hit, like, who am I to say like, no, we can't do that? Like, if he's hitting, great, awesome. If he feels comfortable, if he can execute X, Y, and Z, like, go for it. I think that was something though that we were already or I was already privy to, having been at NIAC, and I was around a bunch of people that had newer ideas or different ideas than I had previously seen or heard or even like thought of. There was a lot of stuff I had never even thought of was possible before. And I think you see that and you're like, you know what, like, that can work for player X at this point in time, and I might have to take that out of my tool belt at some point in time. So I'm silly to sit here and think that it's just like irrelevant and it's not going to work and it isn't going to play into those things. To answer your question a little bit, it really is a thing, or it really is a place in time where you might have a guy where he's struggling and falling off the deep end, and that's going to be the thing that, you know, you throw the life raft out and you save him with that. And great, awesome. Like, that wasn't my first train of thought, but it might have been my second or third, and that is a-okay. Or like, there'll be even times where like, we'll talk to some of the other people that are not with us every day. Be like, hey, what do you see? Because I'm getting tunnel vision right now of like my own ideas, my own thoughts. Like, we spend 132 games with these guys, right? Like, we know them, at least we think we know them, but like, we need to look outside of our own realm at times as well too, and say like, what is actually happening here? What do you guys see? Is there a different idea? And then you hit the aha moment, which I'm sure you guys have all been a part of, especially in the facility setting too. Like, I mean, I'm around it a little bit in the winter, but you spend 16, 18 weeks with the same guys over and over and over and over and over again. And they come back in the summer or in the fall and you're like, I'm wondering why I didn't do that in the first place.
Dude,
you know, or they bring you this idea and they're like, this worked for me throughout the entire season. Just my coach gave me this. And you're like, I'm wondering why did I not give you that or think of that in the beginning of all of this? So
that feeling hits so home.
Alex just had a big sigh, because yes, we've all experienced that.
You go through like 6 weeks or 8 weeks where they're just shit, and you're like, I'm awful. Why can't I help this guy? And then they leave, or they get sick and miss a couple sessions, and they come back and they go, this is what I'm doing now. And I'm like, thank God you figured it out, because you know, like I can't.
Or you have a breakthrough in like mid-February, and you're like, fuck. Why did
we wasted 17 weeks?
December.
Right.
God damn it! Like,
I think we underestimate time too.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you know, big time. Like, we all do.
It takes a long time to like get what we want out of them potentially, or like again, that's maybe a little bit too like direct, but like what we see them as being, it takes a long time for them to even take those baby steps, you know. And you might not see it in 6 weeks. Some guys, you're like, yes, that worked. It was a week and a half. Like, then you start to question, like, is it going to stick? I really hope this sticks.
Let's hope it.
What do I need to do to stress test this now? Like, it might stick. Again, a moment from at the facility, like, they've been, like, going through the progression, more or less, that we've kind of put in place at the shed, and guys have been hitting, and then I think 2 weeks ago now, we kind of like introduced the machine with the drills that they were doing and let them kind of try to figure it out. And they're like, they went from I hit tons of homers to I can't hit at all. And you're like, no. Like, there is a progression here. Like, it does take a little bit of time. Like, you're not going to be an MVP as soon as you step into the box and hit off the machine on the first day. But I think that's like the realm of this conversation as a whole is like, you got to give it a little time here. You know?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't stick, you're almost like doing worse than going back to the original piece, right? Like, you would rather them actually stick to something and have it stick for them over a long period of time, rather than being like, hey, you had the aha moment one time, but you can't do it over again. Like, how are we going to ultimately get you to that point and stress test the entire thing with it? So that's where I think it's funny, though, where you go back to the original conversation we had about the blast stuff, and I'll watch guys, like, they'll go through front toss or get back into hitting, you know, kind of like a progression there. And they get to machine, and all of a sudden their numbers change, and they're like, what's going on? It's like, yeah, like, it's harder. It's okay. It's meant to be, right? Like, then you start throwing other stuff at them, like angles and different shapes and, you know, even like arm stuff. And they're like, it's changed again. Yes, this is why we're doing this. Because if you can't do it in a high stress environment, like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
hitting
and that's
so
such an
hard.
important point. Like, people talk about hitting, or they talk about the swing, like, you have it. Like, it's, I have a swing, my swing. I have this swing. It cannot exist outside of the environment in which it's occurring. So it, like, changing the environment will change the way you move. That's just the way it works, and people forget that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the time.
And we want to challenge that, right? Like, if you're not challenging it, then you're ultimately just selling a metric at that point in time. Like, hey, look at, you did this.
Yeah.
Yes.
So going back to the bat speed thing that we talked about at the beginning, if you aren't carrying that over from piece to piece, we understand that there is a break in the chain there where something got too hard and something was too challenging, where you ultimately like stopped going at maximal intent or whatever. I mean, not even maximal intent if you're really thinking about it, but like your 90th percent now is just not what it was before. And why is that? Why do you break those things down? Is it pitch pressure? Is it the machine's too fast and you think you have to move faster? Is it just, I mean, it could be your buddies are around you all of a sudden, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. All right, man, let's wrap there. I think that's a solid one. We might have to do a part 2. I think we could probably ramble on for like 2 hours, but
we didn't get anywhere. We got everywhere and we got nowhere. We got everywhere and we got nowhere. We need a part 2.
Dude,
I learned so much.
Thanks for doing that, man.
Thank you guys.
This is great.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate you, buddy.
Hope you guys are doing well.
Yep, back at you.
Bye.
Bye.